Welcome to the Hodja on Architecture podcast. The Architecture of the Myth, Chapter 6, The Underworld, Architecture of Thresholds. So far in this season, we have traveled through several layers of Greek spatial imagination. We began with chaos, the condition before spatial order. We witnessed the emergence of vertical hierarchy between sky and earth. We climbed to Olympus, where elevation became the architecture of authority. Then we descended into the city of Athens, where myth turned into urban identity. In the previous chapter, we moved outward toward the sea, where Greek civilization discovered mobility and networked geography. But Greek mythology does not only expand across landscapes, it also moves downward. Beneath the visible world lies another domain entirely, the underworld. Unlike Olympus, which dominates the sky, the underworld lies beneath the surface of the earth. It is not a distant place beyond the horizon, but a concealed realm beneath everyday life. The Greeks imagined this space not as abstract darkness, but as a structured territory with boundaries, passages, and guardians. In other words, even death required architecture. The entrance to the underworld is rarely direct. In myth, one must cross a threshold. Rivers mark the boundaries between worlds: Styx, Acheron, Cocytus. These waterways function less as geographical features than as spatial filters. They separate the living from the dead, the reversible from the irreversible. To cross them is to pass into a different order of existence. Architecture frequently begins with thresholds. In the underworld, the ferryman Charon operates as a gatekeeper. The passage requires a coin placed in the mouth of the deceased before burial. Without this ritual payment, the soul remains stranded at the boundary. The myth quietly reminds us that transitions between worlds are rarely free. They require permission, preparation, and recognition of limits. Thresholds create meaning precisely because they regulate movement. In architectural terms, thresholds are everywhere. Doors separate the interior from the exterior. Gates distinguish public from private. Borders mark the difference between one territory and another. The moment we cross a boundary, our behavior changes. We adjust our voice, our posture, our expectations. Architecture is not merely space, it is a controlled transition. The underworld represents the most radical threshold imaginable. Once crossed, it cannot easily be reversed. Heroes occasionally attempt the journey: Orpheus, Heracles, Odysseus, but their stories reveal how fragile such crossings are. Orpheus almost rescues Eurydice from the underworld, yet loses her again at the very moment he looks back. The myth demonstrates that some boundaries exist precisely to resist reversal. Irreversible spaces produce powerful narratives. Greek mythology describes the underworld as a layered territory. Tartarus lies deep below, reserved for punishment and cosmic imprisonment. The Asphodel meadows accommodate ordinary souls who live neither heroically nor wickedly. The Elysian fields reward those favored by the gods. These regions form a moral geography mapped onto spatial depth. The deeper one descends, the more severe the realm becomes. Verticality once again expresses hierarchy, but in reverse. Olympus sits above the world as the summit of divine authority. The underworld lies below, the domain of final judgment. Greek spatial imagination, therefore, stretches between two extremes: elevation and descent. Between these poles, human life unfolds on the surface of the earth. Surface becomes the fragile middle ground between heaven and depth. The architecture of thresholds is not confined to mythology. Many real spaces reproduce this logic: catacombs beneath ancient cities, crypts beneath churches, underground metro systems beneath modern streets, all reveal how societies continue to imagine important functions below the surface. Subterranean spaces often carry symbolic weight. They may store memory, conceal infrastructure, or shelter the vulnerable. Descending underground changes our perception. Light fades, sound becomes muted, orientation becomes uncertain. Even in contemporary architecture, underground spaces evoke a subtle psychological shift. They remind us that the built environment extends beyond what is immediately visible. Greek myth understood this spatial experience long before modern design theory. Caves frequently function as entrances to the underworld. These openings in the earth appear naturally, yet they invite interpretation as gateways between realms. Standing at the mouth of a cave, one senses both curiosity and hesitation. The darkness beyond promises discovery, but also uncertainty. Architecture often begins by framing such openings. A doorway, after all, is simply a civilized cave. Once we recognize this, the mythological underworld begins to resemble a conceptual blueprint for many architectural practices. Museums guide visitors through sequences of rooms that control revelation. Memorials invite quiet descent into reflective spaces. Subterranean galleries create environments where ordinary time seems suspended. Architecture becomes a choreography of transition. The Greeks were not alone in imagining underworlds, yet their mythology expresses an especially structured spatial logic. Rivers, gates, guardians, courts, and regions organize the invisible realm with remarkable clarity. Even death is mapped. The myth insists that boundaries matter. In a culture fascinated by exploration across seas, cities, and landscapes, the underworld introduces a final limit. It reminds the living that not every frontier can be crossed freely. Some thresholds define existence precisely by remaining difficult to pass. Architecture, at its deepest level, is always concerned with such limits. Walls mark where one space ends and another begins. Stairs guide movement between levels. Corridors connect separated rooms. Thresholds regulate the rhythm of transition. Every building tells a story about crossing. The underworld, therefore, represents not merely the end of life, but the culmination of spatial thinking. It gathers many architectural ideas already encountered in this season: vertical hierarchy, territorial division, guarded entrances, and the psychological experience of moving through space. Greek mythology transforms these ideas into narrative form. This may be why stories of descent continue to fascinate us today. From ancient myths to modern cinema and video games, journeys into underground realms remain powerful narrative devices. They transform space into trial and movement into meaning. Some spaces challenge us simply by existing. In the next chapter, we will encounter another spatial invention of Greek mythology, one that does not descend underground but twists space itself into confusion and control. Because if the underworld teaches us about thresholds, the labyrinth teaches us about orientation, and orientation, as we will see, can be far more fragile than it appears. This concludes Chapter 6 of The Architecture of the Myth, The Underworld, Architecture of Thresholds. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.